be recording today. Let me just set the tone. Why is she wearing this red headband? You're wondering. We will get to that in just a second. But the reason we decided to do this webinar today is actually because one of you asked for it. Our colleague, former client, Tama Wagner in St. Joseph, Missouri, said, we want more information about this red teaming. You talked about this and we want more information about it. So I thought, well, probably a lot of people would like a little more information about it. So we thought, let's put it out there and see what happens. And we've had an incredible uptick, incredible interest in doing this. So I thought, well, I don't want to anchor this by myself. So I turned to Bob Kaminski. And you'll meet Bob in just a second, but let me just tell you a little bit about red teaming and why it matters to foresight. So red teaming is a technique that was invented by the US military several years ago, and it came after they had unexpected casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't think I'm summarizing it. I don't think I'm oversimplifying it to say that what the military recognized was US Army, what they recognized was nobody is questioning their authority, right? So if you're a private first class, you are not questioning your commanding officer, and up the chain of command it went. And so if nobody was questioning their supervisor, they weren't getting the benefit from all the eyes that were on the field, all of the eyes and ears and bodies that were on the field. So they invented this technique called red teaming, and I will send out an email like I did after the last meeting that had links and updates and so forth. But what they did is they said there needs to be a process by which we can invite people to disagree with each other. And they called it red teaming. And what we have found in our experience is that if you're trying to do a long-range plan, a visionary plan, a futuristic plan, and you do not have people who will question their bosses, who will question the plan, who will question the tactics, you may end up with something that was created in an echo chamber, right? And that's just not cool, that's not optimal. So this red teaming technique is a way of layering in questions, respectful questions, layering in techniques to ensure that by the time you get to the ta-da of your plan, it's something that A, has had more eyes on it. And one of the things I've learned with Bob's help is that people support the things they build. Right. But the other reason that you want to do this red teaming is because what we know about teams is many people are better than some people, right? So the more people you can engage to ask those hard questions, the better your plan will be overall. And the final thing, and this is mostly for the Midwesterners, this is not for the East Coasters, the coasties, right? Who you naturally are red teamers. Hey, what the hell are you doing, right? You're natural red teamers. But for those of us in the Midwest, or those of us who work in polite organizations, or where we get a little bit uncomfortable asking each other hard questions, red teaming can be a technique where you can introduce being impolite or argumentative in a way that serves the process. So that's what red teaming is, and that's why it's important to foresight. Now let me introduce you to Bob Kaminski. Bob Kaminski is retired US Marine Corps. He is the Director of Strategic Planning at the Omaha Public Power District, which serves 850,000 customers in eastern Nebraska. We've been working on a project together just over a year now. He's become a close friend, and he is an advocate of red teaming. Bob, what else should this audience know about your biography at this point as it relates to red teaming and strategic planning?
Well, one, I want to say good morning or good afternoon to everyone. And Rebecca, what an honor. I truly appreciate the partnership and friendship on our current project, and to be able to talk today. And as you were talking about, the military and why the red teaming came about, it's a very hierarchical structure, and it is very tough to challenge your senior officer. And, you know, I was jumping back to when the military has you move every 1 to 3 years, they put them in orders. They're not requests, they're not asks. Here's your orders. You don't have a choice. And it just feeds into the culture of the organization that, hey, when the commanding general or the admiral says do it, most people jump. And I'd like to share, when I came on, I did a personality assessment. And I think this is probably pretty much standard for any military, I have over 26 years in the Marine Corps. So they probably have my personality locked in, and they go, you'll have no problem challenging your senior leadership team, your board, with anything that could be unethical, immoral, or illegal. But where military falls victim to is hey, I think the old man or old woman is not going down the right path, but I'm not going to say something because they're the commanding general or admiral. Hence the red teaming concept, to give that safe space to not only ask for, but encourage the challenges to the plan, to find those strategic blind spots. The general or admiral is just one individual. They're not the duty expert. And this was an opportunity to pull up the subject matter experts in their specific fields and identify where the leadership may be going down the wrong path. And I'm excited to see how, through Rebecca's leadership and what she has brought to OPPD specifically, this terminology, this concept is starting to weave itself and become part of the district's DNA. And it has been embraced by the senior management. And I'll offer one example, and then, Rebecca, I'm prepped to keep going. But we were in a conversation as OPPD is starting to look at their 30-year vision. And Rebecca was kind enough at the beginning of the process to go over, I think there were 16 cognitive biases. One of them, like groupthink or authoritative bias or action bias. Well, there was a point we were all moving toward one direction. We were all going to one direction. There was a group marching, and they were marching fast. And one brave soul on the senior management team says, I'd like to question. And people literally go, I'd like to red team. And they either bring out their red handkerchief or a scarf or something. And after that conversation and stopping the whole executive team, they literally went 180 degrees out. And it wasn't like a force. It was, hey, I'm going to make myself vulnerable. I need to challenge the CEO. I need to challenge some other very strong personalities. And because of that, another 15 minutes of discussion, and they literally went in the opposite direction. And I thought that was a wonderful example of how red teaming can slow executive strategic thinking down and change the course of the discussion. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. That, you do this so much, you kind of forget about that. But what I would encourage people to hear is, or to think for themselves, how often have you been in a meeting where either you're tired or you just don't have it in you today, but you just let whoever talked last or whoever talked the loudest just have their way, because it's like, I just cannot do it today. And I would challenge that part of the reason that you let that happen is because you don't have a technique. There's no acceptable technique to say, wait just a minute, I actually have a different point of view on something. If you don't have a technique and you do that, you can be expelled from the culture, because then you're seen as that guy, right? Who's always asking the questions and can't just get along to go along. So, Bob, I want you to think about your own experience in the Marine Corps, in the Corps, because we're going to be talking about the red teaming process that we've used at OPPD and that we use in Foresight. But would you share with us, because I think I've heard you use this expression, and I'll be honest, for the audience, Bob and I did not rehearse. I just said, here are a few things I think we should talk about. But I've heard you use the term murder board. Is that what you call it in the Marine Corps? Where does that come from? And how does the Corps use this concept?
So I will, as the Marine Corps has beat into me for many years, Bob Kaminski will speak for Bob Kaminski, not the US government or the United States Marine Corps, because we're being recorded. But there was a technique years ago, and I think it could be maybe the the unruly uncle or relative to red teaming. And Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, or either you've shared the rules of red teaming, which I love, or will, like one of them, don't be a jerk. I think that's phenomenal. The murder board, when I was assigned to the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, and for those, there may be some Marines out there or military, but the
We've got
basic school,
Canadian military who said they use murder board expression as well. Darren Hill, shout out to Canada.
that's right. And there may be a different spin on it, so I'd be open to, Darren, your thoughts on that. But at the basic school, this was our entry level school for newly commissioned second lieutenants and newly appointed warrant officers. And bottom line, before they became a lawyer, a fighter pilot, a logistician, they went through 6 months for the second lieutenant, 6 months of infantry training. And then you got assigned your whatever your profession would be, again, lawyer, you name it. Well, because this was a premier school and it set the tone for the Corps' future leadership, they wanted to have the top-notch instructors. And we would make sure that one of the captains or majors that were going to give a class to the students, they were masters of their subject. And so prior to any instructor getting on the platform to present, they would go before a murder board to get qualified. And this team of captains or majors that were duty experts in their field, they would literally try to tear apart the instructor for the sake of, to better that instructor. Now it came across as, you could be a jerk, you could be unruly, but the intent was to make sure that that instructor was prepared, that they found all the blind spots, asked the crazy questions, whether on subject, off subject. But bottom line is, once this process was completed, we had very good certainty that that new instructor could go on the platform and perform, keep the reputation, to make sure that the students understood the material they were getting after. So this was a kind of a different way to challenge people, to make sure that they're prepared. And how you could translate that out of the military is, before maybe you or one of your employees goes before the executive team, that you sit down and you get a group of your colleagues, your peers, to challenge whatever briefer is going before the senior management. Ask those hard questions, try to throw them off, because the last thing you want is a great idea to be kind of put by the wayside just because of maybe the formatting of the presenter, maybe not being exactly polished. So I think the murder board, although it sounds rough, and in the end, it better prepares the presenter for that executive level brief that they would give. And I'll pause there for any thoughts.
No, Ed, that's great. Aaron has put in the chat, I think one of my grad school professors covertly was a murder board member. And that is the purpose of, in grad school, right, having a panel of professors or other subject matter experts who are going to be your final panel, that you have to prove that you know your stuff, you've asked the hard questions, and they may send you back for revisions once or maybe twice. I'm not sure what the different rules are in the US versus other places in the world. But yeah, so this idea of the murder board, it's like, let's just make sure that we're absolutely prepared. Yeah, Charlie, that's right. The Dissertation Defense Committee. That's exactly right. So I'm going to do a quick share screen. Before I do that, actually, I think you've probably all seen this, but in case you haven't, this is the blog I wrote. And I mean, full disclosure, I wrote this blog because Bob's board, the OPPD board of directors, got red team training, and they said, where is this written up? And I was like, well, unless you're going to buy the book, there is no write-up. So I wrote this up. So the blog that I just put in the chat has some of the screen shares I'm going to show you today. But I want to walk through how Bob and I have used this at OPPD. And Bob, I'll kind of walk through the step, and then if you want to jump in with color commentary, and then we'll give the balance of our time to our audience for their questions. And by the way, y'all, if you've been with us for a while, you can throw those questions in the chat at any time. We'll moderate them as we go. If that's relevant, we'll leave them till the end. But let me do just a quick screen share here. So really, there we go. So I'm here about the details, right? New Yorker cartoon. So red teaming is this opportunity, and the reason I put the devil there is because the original concept came out of the Vatican. The office of the devil's advocate was created by the Catholic Church to ensure that people who were up for canonization had a full reconnaissance mission on all of their past, right? So that's really where this concept comes from for red teaming, is this idea that we need somebody to play devil's advocate. And why the red bandana? Because as I mentioned, if you're in a very polite environment, and now in this virtual environment where we're doing team meetings as a distance, sometimes it's a useful token to say, hey, I'm going to use my red team here. There are times even in a process where we will say, all right, Dennis, Charlie, Joe, we want all of you to be red team, put on your bandanas so we know that all your pain in the ass questions are coming from the red bandana. They're not coming because you're trying to be that guy or that gal or that person, right? They're coming because it's your job. So A1A is this idea of red teaming comes out of the Vatican, out of the Catholic Church. Now, Bob mentioned bias training, right? And for those of you who've been through camp, for those of you who have been through the futurist mindset workshops that I've done, you know that this is one of the first things we tackle, is that your ability to see the future is limited by any biases that you may have. There's no such thing as a bias-free person. These are mechanisms that help protect us and help our days run smoothly. But we have to get in the right mindset for this. We have to get in the right mindset. So, so red teaming is taught at the same time that we teach mindset, that we do bias training. And I can't imagine doing it later in the process. You know, Bob, I wonder what you talk about bias and red team training, and you've even packaged them as kind of the same thing, you know, like it's part and parcel of the same thing. Can you tell us a little bit about where you have seen the value of doing that mindset training and that red team training at the same time? Because some people pull them apart. A lot of organizations are doing cognitive bias training right now, but not a lot of organizations are doing red team training. What do you think?
You know, Rebecca, there's a couple things that, you know, leading into it. One, don't be that guy. You know, there's always that fear that you could be that guy, that gal that's always nitpicking the plan. And I can't underestimate the value of the visual aid that Rebecca talked about, like a red scarf, a red hat, because it creates that safe space and saying, I am challenging you. And in fact, I know our executives are going to say, hey, I like to challenge that. This is a red team challenge. And it basically disarms the team. Like, I'm not trying to come at it, destroying what you want to propose. I'm trying to make it better. But I think the same thing, if you can call out a bias, you know, it adds to it's just not me. Hey, I think we're going down a groupthink path or that authoritative bias path. So I think if you can, like Rebecca said, if you have a process, it helps to red team, but without it, people might just let whatever concept go without challenging it. Same thing now that, you know, if you know that there's 16 of these kind of main cognitive biases out there, it helps you identify it and bring it forward in a safe manner, along with the red bandana, red scarf. So I think it just gives you that space to engage in a professional manner. Over.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for, it is that space to engage in a professional manner, and we still put some guardrails around it. So I copied these into the chat. Please, I know many of you scribe your way through our Friday events, but the rules of red teaming, and these are from Bryce Hoffman, who wrote the book Red Teaming. There are only, in my experience, 2 really good books on red teaming, and this one feels far more practical. The other one feels a little more theoretical. So this would be my go-to. If you can only buy one, get this one. But rule number 1 is to don't be a jerk. And what we often say here is, like, be hard on ideas, but not on people, right? Just because Rebecca said something that you think is uninformed, right? Hit the idea, don't hit Rebecca. That's not what we're about. Rule number 2 is it has to be okay to red team. Bob and I just came out of a meeting where I red teamed his boss's boss, right? So, and why was that possible? Because most consultants don't disagree with the big head cheese, right? Why is that possible? Because we already agreed to these things, that anybody can red team anyone else when it seems really important. So that's rule number 3. This process will work if you let it. Rule number 4, for sure red team, but good God, don't red team things to death. Bob, maybe we could talk a little bit about the experiences we've had where we've had somebody say, I'm going to red team that. And then somebody says, I'm going to red team the red team. And, you know, there is this notion of it's okay to, but then there's always a point at which we stop. So rules 4 and 5 kind of go together. Here's rule number 6 is, you know, the person who brings up the red team challenge is sometimes the one who, as Bob mentioned, steers the conversation in a more predictive, in a more useful path, but not always. And that's actually a sign of good red teaming. When it's like, yep, we heard you, and we still think option A is the one we need to move forward on. And then the 7th rule is, you know, if the red teaming doesn't work in the first meeting, keep introducing it, keep bringing it in. So Bob, over to you. You know, as you think of your 15 months of experience now with red teaming, what jumps out to you from these rules in terms of the ones that you guys rely on the most, or the ones that you feel are the most useful?
Well, you know, just going to rule number 4, and that just happened, as Rebecca said a few minutes ago, where there's like, hey, I need to red team the red team challenge. And it brought the conversation back to to the 30-year vision that we were looking at. And it was not, again, there was like 5 minutes of, where we went down one path on a red team challenge. And then another, senior leader, one of our executives says, hey, I want to red team that, and brought us back in a different direction. So I can't, state enough. Rule 4 is all these rules are great. They work, and I think provide those those bumpers to allow you to navigate in a safe space. And I go back to why this is important, and I think this is human nature, that we may not want to challenge another one of our colleagues or peers for fear that, hey, if we challenge their project, well, that's just going to come back around and bite me when I bring forward my proposal, my initiative. That is just going to be, okay, I'm going to be deep set, mine is going to be put to the side. So I think there's that inherent concern. Having the senior management, you or whomever you're working with agree to these rules up front, I think is very productive. And that, Rebecca, that goes back to what you said, from OPPD, our executives rallied around and agreed to these rules, and again, allowed that space for those healthy challenges, and to every day, allow.
Maybe it's just me. I lost Bob there just for a second. I'm sure he's going to come back on at any point. But while he is reloading, I'm going to come to what red teaming is not, and what it is and what it is not. Both sides of that coin are important. So the first thing, I mean, if you really want this to have a transformative effect on your organization, sorry, Bob, we lost you for just a second. So I moved to what red teaming is not. If you really want this to have a transformative effect on the organization, what you want to do is make sure that leaders don't feel threatened by it. That's why at OPPD, we started at the top, right? We made sure they were comfortable with it, because then the chances of them using it within their own teams, right, was going to go up. And I think it's fair to say most people see the value of it and have encouraged their teams to now use these techniques in a useful way. Let me just real quickly, the other 2 things about what red teaming is not, and then let's come back to Bob for some color commentary, but it is not a new plan. So what usually happens is you create something, a 2050 vision, and you take it to a red team and you say, how does this land for you? How does this resonate with you? What do you feel we missed? That is not an invitation to come up with a completely different plan, right? So you have to be able to put healthy parameters around what it is you're looking for, and creating a brand new plan is not one of them. And then the final thing, and we mentioned this, is right, Red teaming doesn't always have to be right. The idea is to create a container for different voices, Bob, over to you. Feedback on this?
Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I dropped off my internet on this side. I totally agree. You know, what the red teaming is not, and for me, it's not a challenge to leadership, and it's not creating a new plan. So I think those are spot on. And if I could drift a little bit off this, I think there has been a lot of folks, as this term red teaming has been kind of seeping into the organization, and what folks have come back with is, hey, is everyone using the correct, okay, I know I can say the term, but are we using it in the right way? So both for the rules and what it is and what it is not, I think one of the important factors is making sure that your team, your folks are trained on this so that you can properly bring it to life in the way and the spirit and intent that it was designed for.
Yeah, you know what that makes me think of, Bob, is there are a couple of personality types that probably everyone on this call is familiar with, who have a natural relationship with red teaming that is either useful or not useful. And let me describe. The first personality type are the people who are natural red teamers. Like we had somebody today say, red team is the way I think about life. Is it any wonder I'm an entrepreneur, right? That's true, right? If you are a person who is naturally a questioner, a person who naturally like has these red team tendencies to question everything, you do turn into like that person inside of an organization. And some of you have worked with that person who just questions everything, and they can be a little tiring to be around. But if you ask that person, they're like, I just want to make sure that we're not stepping into a ditch. I just want to make sure that we've thought things through. Their intentions are generally very good, right? So you do have some people who are natural red team members. And when introducing the concept of red teaming, it is too easy for all of you to sit back and say, well, I know that Yvonne's going to red team this, so I don't need to do it because she's a natural red teamer. You can't shut her up. She's got 15 questions about everything. So I'll just let her do her natural Yvonne thing, right? That is unfair. It is unfair to Yvonne. Because if Yvonne feels like she always has to be the person who asks the tough questions, she's not stupid. She knows that this is pigeonholing her. I can't tell you how many times I have done training on this and people have chased me through the parking lot as I'm going to my car to leave the training, who've been like, Rebecca, you were so right. I know I'm that guy, or I know I'm that girl. And it is so hard. I know everybody hates me, you know? So number one, it's not fair to Yvonne to let her always take all the heat to do all the red teaming. So that's the first personality type, is the natural red teamer. Everybody needs to share in the responsibility for red teaming. And then there's a second kind of a person. This is the kind of a person who, like with the Gallup Strengths Finder, for example, has harmony in the top 5. The people who want to harmonize groups are very uncomfortable with conflict. Uncomfortable with conflict generally, but then are super uncomfortable if they have to be the one to ask the question. That's the second kind of a person for whom this kind of stuff, I'm literally my whole body is tingling right now because I do not like conflict, right? I am a person who likes it when it's harmonious, but sometimes you, as the person who likes harmony, need to be able to step forward, and this helps a lot, to say, I need to ask a tough question. Here's what it is. So red teaming as a technique really relieves pressure from the Yvonnes and creates some positive, I think it's more positive stress on the natural harmonizers who normally would just hang back because it makes them a little uncomfortable. But this is the kind of a skill that people really do need to develop if they're going to be leaders, if they're going to be respectful decision makers, you know, if they're going to be able to hear other points of view. Yes, Dennis, a process to encourage change. Oh, and Bob, come on and talk about this rotation of red teaming responsibilities. We haven't even touched on that yet. Go ahead.
I'm going to try to turn my video back on, but my internet goes unstable. Oh, I'm going to go back off. All right.
Okay, all right.
So one, and I do want to recognize, looks like there is a question from Michelle. So maybe when I get done, if you want to address that. It was very interesting as we started the red teaming. One, it takes practice. And it was very, as Rebecca just said, as we were kind of working through some very light topics, but just to try to get the feel of it, it was uncomfortable and scratchy, and folks had to warm up to it. So, you know, to build that into your planning process, that it's not going to be perfect the first time. The rotating though is key. And as Rebecca said, because we started to do the deliberate rotation, like, okay, so here's one of our guiding principles. Here is who's going to be the supporter, who's going to present it. Here's going to be red team member 1. And then here's going to be an advocate to support the supporter. And then here's red team member number 2. And we rotated around as we first started this process. And that's where we learned, wow, this is difficult, but it really helped everyone appreciate how tough this is, but then also start to get comfortable in the red team skin and hat that they will be wearing. And it proved very beneficial.
You know, Bob, I don't know if you would say that this is true, but I think the other thing that those intentional rotations help to do, they did help the red teamer to ask the tough questions of their peers. It also helped these executives who, you know, run their business units to have to take hard questions, right? Because especially in these in very polite cultures where there isn't a culture of questioning each other, it can be hard to be questioned. You know, you've got to practice receiving that kind of feedback as well. So Michelle, let's have you come off mute and ask the question you have about critical thinking and red teaming.
And sorry, I can't quite put this in the chat because the question is not fully developed, but it occurs to me that critical thinking skills are a necessary component to this. If it affects you, like the military example of you have orders to move, you're going to have some critical thinking, you're going to have some reaction because you've already thought through how that affects you. But there are certain ones that maybe don't affect you in the same way. And critical thinking is a whole nother skill set, and applying the critical thinking is what you're talking about, right? Like I'm coming in, I'm asking questions because I've critically been thinking about it, but how do you get somebody up to the point of having that skill set of I'm hearing something and I critically want to think about both sides? It comes naturally to some people. And then the secondary natural part is to speak up. Some people can speak up, but don't have the critical thinking skills. And then the sweet spot is I've critically thought about it and I can think of, but how do you get people up there?
Yeah. Bob, do you want to take a first cut at this? I have some ideas as well.
I do. I think that's a fantastic question. And you really challenged me, Michelle, on that. 'Cause I'm thinking, wow, I think it goes back to one of the comments that folks were starting to hear, or we were hearing, hey, this red team, you know, my vice president is starting to talk about red teaming. What is it? So I think that first is try to help in that process of getting formal training and to really set the expectations. What is it? The boundaries, the parameters to frame that. And then also, you know, in the employees' professional development, you know, weaving in that strategic thinking and professional skills. And I know Rebecca does a good job. It's not only the red teaming, but in her case, you know, it's the bias training and also foresight training, which I think would help in that critical skills, because most of us are stuck in the, you know, kind of for the utility industry, keeping the lights on today. And that's what matters. And it's critically important for the, you know, kind of your first responders, your hospital, senior living communities. That's a no-fail mission. And so, but then how do you break out to talk hard level, capital level investments, 25, 30 years in? The foresight process that Rebecca goes through in conjunction with the bias training and this red teaming, I think are a perfect blend, at least to start. And it's also the appreciation that it's not going to be perfect the first time. We now have senior leaders that are trying to incorporate, they are bringing the, you know, they have mailed red handkerchiefs to their folks, or red those rubber wristbands that folks can start to weave in. And it is a learning process and it won't be perfect. So I don't know, Michelle, well, I'll turn it over to Rebecca. Hopefully I gave a little bit, but I think training is going to be key to anything. And again, the foresight bias and red teaming will help move that effort forward. Over.
Thank you, Bob. And Bob and Michelle, and other people have talked about this too. I think Rebecca Johns was talking about the critical thinking component. So one of the things, I mean, all of these things point to being able to think clearly and to have the time to think through things. So I know you're all getting so sick of hearing me talk about slow thinking and the importance of slow thinking to doing long range planning. But there needs to be permission in the organization to slow the hell down. You know, when you look at executives today, they're very often asked to make lots of decisions with very imperfect and maybe even incomplete information. And I think one of the things as executives that we need to do is be able to pull apart, you know, we can't just give the same chop, 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 chop answer to every single decision that people are asking us to make. There are some things that you have to slow down and think more slowly about. And in foresight, of course, we have the benefit of, if we're trying to think out to 2050 in OPPD's case, or 2030 in many other situations, like Steve's here with us from Versa, right? We can give ourselves permission to take a year to do this work, to take 9 months to do this work. We don't have to pound this out. Like most of your strategic planning processes are 2-day offsites with a facilitator. Nobody is slow thinking in an environment like that. You know, you're barely licking the frosting off the cupcake by the end of day 2. So there's something underneath this, Michelle, that your question forces me to think about, which is giving people the time and space to do critical thinking. Like at Futurist Camp, one of the first things we have people do is read 6 chapters of the CIA Intelligence Analysis Handbook, where all 6 of those chapters are about thinking about how your own mind thinks. Most people never do this work. And these are not easy chapters, right? They're oh my God, they're not easy. But we're from the go, we are saying, we're going to require you to think at a different level. And in most organizations today, the kind of drive-through professional development that we do, the kind of in and out planning that we do, does not allow what I think is the right pace for having some of these really big discussions. So I would, yeah, go ahead, Bob, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very excited. So one of the things you were talking about, the slow thinking, and I think that the tagline cannot be overstated. For our executive team, one thing that we found, and again, where they're so, you know, supportive of, how do you create the space for that creative thinking, that slow thinking? And it was the support for them to put, so we have 4 hours a month of strategic, you know, that dedicated time to talk strategy as a group. That doesn't count maybe the one-on-ones that, you know, we may have with them on, hey, what are your thoughts on this long range critical thinking? So it's really going back and finding out, for lack of any more elegance, to find time on their calendars and to get that commitment to allow them to lift up out of the day-to-day decisions that they're making, and to focus beyond the quarters, you know, report, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. I think finding time on a calendar is a very tangible objective to move toward. Over.
Thank you, Bob. Jason Lauritsen has a kind of a longer question. If you want to jump back into the chat and read that one. I want to quickly to John Warren. This guy does red team training. And I also think probably a Google search for red team training would be useful. We offer it as part of Futurist Camp. Not maybe as complete as like what we're doing with Bob's team for this long range planning, but you know, a little more accessible. You know, we're not asking for a 14-month commitment. So what do you think, Bob, about Jason's question about, you know, event-based versus just kind of management protocol?
Oh, I'm just reading it right now real quick.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yep. So Jason's getting at like, okay, red teaming can be used like, we built something, red team it, versus this notion of just how the team agrees to work with each other. I mean, I feel like what you guys are doing on your team is you're doing both. But I suppose you could use it in just planning. But why would you? Like, once you learn it, it's like, this is so valuable. I don't know. Maybe I'm over in love with this concept.
So I guess at the higher, what I'm thinking is, as we're developing the vision for OPPD, it's just not about the one document, the one piece of paper that you're going to put in a binder and not look at again. It's a movement. It's continuous, and I see the red team as a part of that continual effort to make sure that you're staying flexible and agile, because the day that kind of vision is signed and approved by your executives, it starts to not fall apart, but there's the dynamic changes in industry, technology, customer preferences, things that need to be accounted for and may negate what you do have in your plan. So I think you always have to red team, and it's got to be woven into your planning process and even into execution. So hopefully that answered, Jason, provided a little background, at least the way we're looking at it. Over.
And Jason, if you want to pull off mute because we didn't cover it, you please go ahead and do that. While you're loading up, I'm going to share one other thing here. Well, I was going to share one other thing. Here we go. Are you seeing me what red teaming is not? Can somebody give me an audible on that?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So this is my dog. I think she's a red teamer extraordinaire because she will always note things that are not in alignment with how she thinks things should go. But what I wanted to share with you are the 3 buckets of techniques, right? So these are the 3 sort of, standard buckets of techniques. And in Hoffman's book, he's got, oh my God, dozens of examples for each kind of a technique. But the first one is to question the unquestionable. So every organization has some sacred cows, right? Maybe it's like the program that nobody has the cojones to kill, even though it's dragging down resources, but like nobody wants to, nobody's willing to poke that stick from 20 feet, right? So one of the kind of tool that's helpful in that situation are more analytical tools, right? So these are ways that you can question assumptions, okay? The second thing is to use these imaginative techniques to start to think the unthinkable. So for those of you who have gone through our scenario workshop, or who came to Futurist Camp, and we looked at scenario building and using the power of imagination to imagine what could be, those are the techniques in kind of the second bucket. So the kinds of questions you would ask as a red teamer is like, hey, Bob, I heard what you said about our customers in 2050, and I wonder if, blah, 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 those kinds of I wonders, or this could happen. Is it plausible that, right? And then the final thing is this kind of contrarian thinking. So some of this is about challenging, about sort of being the jerk in a way, who's like, well, that's not going to work because of this thing over here. That's not going to work because of this thing over here. And this is the one where, when you're making bread, and you're trying to tell if after like this, well, maybe you don't know, but like after you push the bread down and you see if it springs back, right? There's a process, there's a reason why you do that, right? If you push the bread down and the hole stays there, right? Well, maybe the gluten hasn't formed well enough, so it just springs back because there's nothing to prevent it. So this challenging is like pushing to make sure that like the dough is ready to get baked, to make sure that the gluten strands are ready to face the heat of the oven. So that's kind of the third reason, or the third tool. And I wonder, Bob, from your perspective, it feels a little bit like we kind of weave in and out of these, but does anything come to mind for you and your reflection about, do you think we do one more than the other? Is there one set of techniques we seem to use more that work better?
No, I think just bringing them to where when the process that you can professionally challenge a colleague or your senior, these just help you give, it's drilling down into that process, more tools in the kit bag to be able to professionally engage. And I would, one thing, Rebecca, I said, one thing I would love to share, and I was just challenged with this recently, when we think about red teaming and formalizing the process and continuing to get better, that I was asked, hey, red teaming normally feels like we're always trying to, hold back. That plan can't happen because of X. And it's more on the negative side. Well, the challenge to me was, should we have an aspirational team? Part of that, hey, I'm not saying you're going too slow. I'm saying you're not going fast enough.
I love it.
Are we trying to hold our own selves back in the original plan because of, any number of concerns or fears? Hey, technology won't be there. The customers won't be there. You name it, the board won't be there. But to flip the script, so having another side of the red team coin about, are you aspirational enough, and to use those kind of 3 questions that Rebecca just posed as, again, tools for this concept. I know we're running low on time. I want to thank everyone for at least, your patience in listening to me. This has been wonderful. And I've learned just through some of the questions, and again, through Rebecca. And please feel free, if you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, I welcome it. And Rebecca, to you, ma'am.
Oh man, Bob, thank you so much. And Mary Beth just put the CIA Intelligence Analysis Handbook. This is it's dated, but it is so solid. And some of you camp alum are probably having PTSD just looking at this monster, because it was a ridiculous amount of reading. But Bob, as we close up, first of all, thanks to you for saying yes to this, because it's one thing to have me flap on about this technique. It's another thing to have somebody who's learned it, within the last 14 months, say, here's how we use it, here's how it helps, here's how it does. And I hope that some of your takeaways are this. One, it's really useful to have somebody questioning, right? To have somebody questioning. And if you can create the psychological safety in your organization to hear those questions, then your plans are probably going to be stronger. So it's almost the idea, like Bob talked about the murder board, that what this red teaming is we're not waiting for the one moment to tear you apart. We are kind of back and forth in a conversation around, are we thinking about this the right way? Is that the option we want to take? Could we do this faster? Are we thinking too small? So it's a way of taking a single event and sort of spreading it through a process or spreading it through a culture. But I do want to bring it back to this. Many of you are engaged right now in fundamental rethinks of your organizations. Fundamental rethinks, because what the pandemic has shown many of our organizations is that it's been an X-ray showing where all the breaks are in the system, and you are trying to reimagine what it might look in an even better future. Red teaming is a technique that you can use to ensure that whatever you're pouring your guts into right now, whatever you are pouring your board and your top teammates, and you're calling on people to give you their best at this moment, red teaming is one technique to give it a better chance of being successful. So with that, I'm going to close it, but I am going to hang out, Bob. I want to respect your time. I know you may have to go. So if you can hang out, I'll be here for a little while, kind of like, hanging out after class. But if you need to go, get on to your next thing. Thanks everybody for being here today. Oh, real quickly, Futurist Camp, we're announcing it next week. If you want to know when it's going to happen, or if you're an alum and you want to come back and be a camp counselor, y'all are welcome. Let me know if you want to know when it happens, and we'll send you a special email when registration opens. Thanks everybody, appreciate you. Bob, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.